Hey y'all, and welcome back to our videos. So in this particular one, we're going to be starting Unit 7, so the criminal and civil law processes, otherwise lovingly referred to as the law. Okay, so I have put a little law and order thing here in the beginning because when I think of the law and criminal justice, I always hear the beginning to law and order in my head in the criminal justice system. That's what I hear. And that's exactly what that video is. So we're going to skip this quote for now. We may come back to it later. So for criminal law, we're going to go ahead and define criminal law as something that protects people from harm, and it's supposed to punish those who do harm. Now we know, because we are intelligent, that our criminal justice system is certainly not perfect. It is broken in several ways. And we'll talk about how we can fix that in a later lesson. But for now, we're going to discuss what exactly it is supposed to be at its core. So again, criminal law is supposed to protect people from harm and punish those who do harm, either to people, to people's property, to themselves, that sort of thing. And we'll talk about the categories here in a little bit. So let's talk about criminal law versus civil law. And we touched on this just a tad in Unit 6, but we'll touch on it again now just to refresh ourselves. So criminal law means that an actual law was broken. So a piece of legislation that lists out what is to be done and not to be done was not followed by an individual or by a corporation. Someone did not do something correctly. Civil law, on the other hand, means that a contract was broken. So nobody broke a law. Nobody's ended up going to jail. Although in some civil cases, it does end up being criminal at the end. Nobody has broken the law. They have broken a contract. So again, examples of civil law would be custody battles, which sometimes can end up in criminal court if you don't pay your child support, because that is a criminal offense. You cannot get a passport if you owe more than $2,500 in child support to your baby mama or your baby daddy. Okay, so there's that. Civil law, however, not quite the same. Civil law is about like maybe an individual did not pay their rent for 3 months and their landlord sues them for their back payment. Civil law could be an athlete was drafted to a sports team, blew out their knee toward their ACL, and could no longer play, and then decided to just never go to therapy and never go to practice. And that team has paid them millions of dollars to get their body right, and they're not doing it. And so then they're in what's called breach of contract. So if you made an agreement, a legally binding agreement with a person or a party, and you didn't fulfill it, they then have the legal right to pursue action against you. All right, so let's talk about federalism, our beautiful funnel of federalism that we love so dearly. And again, federal is up top because federal is supreme at all times. State is in the middle, and then municipal/local is at the bottom. So again, this is a tiny flashback to Unit 6. At the federal level, when we talk about criminal law, the criminal justice system is characterized by Supreme, Appellate, and District Courts. Okay, so the SAD cake. The state courts are characterized by the SAS-D cake, Supreme, Appellate, Superior, and District. And again, please make sure you make the distinction between Supreme and Superior. They're two different courts, serve two different functions, and have two different types of jurisdiction. All right, here in local courts, it's literally just local courts. Things that are down the road from you, places where you get your speeding tickets processed, any drunken disorderlies, anything that can land you in a local jail overnight would wind you up in municipal court, depending on whatever charge comes against you. All right, so some words to know before we really dig in. These words may or may not come back to haunt you on a future assessment, so please be mindful of that. The first one is presumption of innocence, okay? And some of these words might be a little tough for us to chew on, but we're going to break these down. So presumption, we know what pre means. That means before. So before you decide that somebody is guilty, you are supposed to think of them as innocent until you are proven guilty. Now, we as a society are real bad, especially in the United States, about like, the husband did it. I just know he did. Girl, you don't know that. Don't say that, okay? So you are supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. Now, you might feel it in your spirit that the husband did it, but until he is proven with physical evidence in order to convict that person, you cannot assume that they are guilty in the court system. Society is one thing, but in the court system, you must be considered innocent until proven guilty. All right. In order to do that, you need the second thing, which is called an impartial tribunal. Now, if you were an individual, let's say that you are the husband and you did not do it. Okay, you didn't kill your wife like everybody thinks that you did. All right, but you walk up into a courtroom and you know that when you walk outside, there's going to be reporters in your face, there's going to be cameras in your face asking you all kinds of questions. We know that you did it. Why'd you kill your wife? That is not the type of environment that you want inside of the criminal justice system. In the courtroom, you would like to think that the opposing counsel, so the attorney who is trying to put you in jail, the attorney who's trying to keep your tail out of jail, and the judge and the jury and everybody else in that courtroom who is listening is impartial, which means they are not biased. So an impartial tribunal means that you have the right to an unbiased group of humans in the process, okay? So we'll touch on vocab just a little bit again. So again, a judge is a person who issues a sentence and is basically the referee for the court proceedings. So if one attorney says something they should not have, one witness says something they should not have, the judge is there to be a referee, and we'll discuss that more in detail in our next lesson. So the jury over here is supposed to find a verdict. Remember, this typically happens inside of federal district courts, state superior courts, all right, in local courts. So a jury, the one that you're thinking about, is the one who decides guilty or innocent. A grand jury, we'll talk about a little more in our next lesson. They decide if there's enough evidence to even take you to trial in the first place. A prosecutor is the person who's trying to put somebody behind bars, and a defense attorney is trying to keep them out. Ooh, also, which amendments say that you have the right to an unbiased group of humans? I hope you know, because there's a question coming up. If you said the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th Amendments, you'd be correct, because the 5th Amendment allows you the right to due process, D-U-E, process. Remember, that is our ring finger one. It also allows you the right to no self-incrimination or no self-snitching. And then Amendments 6 and 7 allow you the right to a speedy and fair trial in both criminal and civil proceedings. Number 3 is the right of appeal. If you feel as though, after you got your guilty verdict hanging over your head, the law has been applied unfairly to you, you have the right to appeal your case. Okay, you got a right to appeal, like Clarence Earl Gideon, our pal from Unit 6, who had an 8th grade education and had to represent himself in court because he could not afford an attorney and did not know he had the right to an attorney, decided to appeal to the Supreme Court on prison stationery, Clarence Earl Gideon, okay, and he ended up winning his suit. All right, and then we have number 4, the adversarial nature. Nobody at any point in time, in any court case, is ever going to hear 100% of the story or 100% of the truth. It sounds kind of scary, but that is how it works. Nobody goes into the court system to find out every single detail of what happened on whatever day the crime was allegedly committed. The purpose of the courtroom is to decide whether or not someone is guilty or innocent, and we need to trim down those facts and trim down that evidence until we have only what we need to reach a guilty or a not guilty verdict, or we would literally never get cases solved. Okay, so while we do want to make sure that the truth comes out, we also want to make sure that we are respectful of people's time and we move through the court system quickly. So the adversarial nature means that you have two sides that are adversaries or kind of enemies, and they both have different interests, and the whole truth may not come out. All right, let's get to types of law. The first one is constitutional law. Obviously, it deals with the Constitution. Who would have thought? All right, it's based on precedent, okay? So, for example, you must be informed of your rights when arrested. This is based on the 5th Amendment. Dun, 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 dun. I put a picture of Obama up here because prior to becoming the senator of Illinois, a senator of Illinois, I should say, and the 44th president of the United States, former President Obama was a constitutional lawyer, and he does have a law degree from Harvard. So his job was to argue in front of the Supreme Court and make sure that people's constitutional rights were being taken care of. The next one is criminal law that we've been talking about this whole time. A law has been broken. So, for example, Lil Wayne, my fave, was arrested for weapons possession. He's not going to say anything when he gets in the box, but alas, there it is. And there's Lindsay Lohan and Elvis being wild. Next is civil law. So this is a case between people. A contract was broken. So, for example, a landlord sues a tenant for money. This is Judge Mathis, Judge Judy, Judge Brown type stuff. Tort law is a civil case that involves harm or neglect. So, for example, a woman sues McDonald's for damages after a hot coffee burn. You've probably heard of this case. People like to say, oh, you can spill a cup of coffee at McDonald's and make $1 million. That is false, okay? This is more so like, or your granny falls at the nursing home. Nobody ever comes to check on her for like 3 hours and she winds up getting sores as a result on her body. That is due to neglect or somebody ignoring their responsibilities. And so that is called tort law. So things that cause harm or neglect to someone is a completely separate, like little subgroup of civil law. We'll skip that for now. Administrative law is made by the executive branch. So if you're like, wait, what? I thought laws were made by the legislative branch. You should have alarm bells going off in your head right now. Laws are typically made by the legislative branch. However, sometimes Congress moves a little slow, and the executive branch, the one that enforces the law, has got to go ahead and write their own laws that need to be enforced. So, for example, every single piece of food that you pick up in a grocery store that is not a fresh fruit or a fresh vegetable or from the bakery has got on the back of it a nice little black and white label on the side that says nutrition facts, and it lists out every single ingredient that is inside of that food and what percentage of it is fats, is carbohydrates, is protein. You have got to know what is going in your body. That is not from Congress. That is because the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, they're an agency in the bureaucracy. They are in charge of making sure that you know what is in your food. So that is administrative law. Endangered species lists are also part of administrative law. So this little nutrition facts label that you either love or hate, depending on what food you are eating, is administrative law. The next one is statutory law. This is literally every single law in the entire United States that is not the Constitution, that is not the 7 Articles or the 27 Amendments. Statutory law is literally everything else. Okay? All right, common law is made by the judicial branch. It's based on precedent, so cases that happened before that time, things that happened in the past, and it started in England, and the Pilgrims brought it over here, and we just kept it, okay? So common law is the reason that school segregation is no longer a thing, and everybody can go to school anywhere they would like to with regards to public schools, regardless of their melanin content in their body. Another example of common law that's a little more recent is the fact that gay marriage is now constitutional. The Supreme Court ruled in 2015 that you are allowed to marry someone and you are allowed to issue a marriage license to someone who is the same gender as you. So that is not a law that was passed by Congress. However, it was a decision that was made by the judicial branch, by the Supreme Court, and therefore it stands as law, but it's called common law if a judge makes it. All right, international law is laws between countries. So an example of this would be like war crimes in the United Nations, which is basically like a big old Congress for the whole globe, who gets together in months of September through December every year, and they kind of like try to solve some problems. An example of this would be war crimes. So like post-World War II, Nazis that were in Hitler's regime were rounded up and they were put on a whole bunch of trials. Some of them were executed, some of them were jailed for life, some of them escaped, and then some of them have been found out here recently and been outed by their neighbors. There was a little old man who lived in Brooklyn who used to be like a high-ranking Nazi soldier who was taken to a prison facility to live out the rest of his days. So international law is something that is effective of the whole globe. All right, and we will stop for now, and that'll be part 1.